Hello and welcome to the Ghost Town Chronicles. Today we continue our exploration of the most fascinating abandoned military bases. Let's discover 20 military bases that have been abandoned after the Second World War, their history, and the secrets they are hiding. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to help us continue making these series. Number 1. Karosta Sea Forts and Coastal Defense Battery, Latvia. These forts are the remains of an old military establishment on the Baltic coast of Latvia. The ruins consist of isolated buildings rising up from the sea, as well as the jumbled remains of destroyed fortifications and ammunition stores. Primarily, the broken and fractured concrete blocks are the result of intentional explosive demolition of the structures sometime before World War I. However, nature has also played a part over the intervening decades. The strong Baltic Sea currents and fierce winter storms have further damaged the foundations of the buildings. Over the years, the swirling eddies and driving waves have eroded away concrete. As a result of this, the buildings have tilted and sunk into the sands. Constructed in the 1890s and early 1900s, this location served as a naval base of the Tsar of Russia. At this time, the fortifications were to protect it from Empire's biggest enemy, the German Empire. This area was part of the coastal defenses, located on the northern side of the town. The coastal artillery batteries served as platforms for large-caliber guns and mortars. Less than a decade after the construction, it appears these coastal defenses were deemed a strategic mistake. The exact reasons behind this are not entirely clear. The cannons were dismantled and moved elsewhere. The structures were destroyed via controlled detonations, or that was the plan. After 2 rounds of explosives, the broken remains of the defenses were just left abandoned. In the aftermath of World War I, Latvia fought to establish independence. This city saw fierce fighting, but the Latvian armed forces repelled both the Russian and German forces, and Latvia gained internationally recognized independence by 1921. Latvia came under Soviet control by the early 1940s and remained part of the USSR until 1992. It was known as the Latvian Soviet Socialist Republic at this time. The port was home to thousands of Soviet Navy personnel, and was a closed military town forbidden to the general population. Number 2. Soviet Radioelectronics School, Latvia. The Soviet Radioelectronics School was once an important training academy for military engineers training to join the Soviet Latvia Army. It has been abandoned since the early 1990s, when Latvia asserted independence from the Soviet Union. This large building has an impressive main entrance stairway and pink-walled assembly room, both very photogenic. The crumbly molded plaster work of the corridors and foyers are a decayed treat. There are Soviet traces around every corner, papers and posters from the late 1980s and early 1990s with Cyrillic text. At the end of a hall, a mural-decorated alcove, where a bust of Lenin once stood. One interesting find was a fragment of a poster, titled Features of Commodity Money Relation Under Socialism, along with the state quality mark of the USSR. Latvia was once a federated republic within the Soviet Union. At this time it was called the Latvian Soviet Socialist Republic. After the Soviet annexation of Latvia in 1939, the Soviet Red Army set up military bases over the next few years. This Soviet radioelectronics school was built in the 1960s to train engineers and scientists for the Latvian SSR armed forces. At this time, Latvia was becoming one of the technology and industry hubs of the Soviet Baltic area. This school provided the highest level of education, training the Union's future military personnel. Soviet control of Latvia began to destabilize in the late 1980s. The people began to protest for greater autonomy from the USSR. In 1990, Latvia declared the Soviet annexation void and in breach of Latvian law. 1990 to 1991 saw a transition period as Latvia progressively reasserted its independence. Full independence was achieved in 1991, in the aftermath of a failed Soviet coup. A subsequent landslide majority vote for independence in a referendum ended the transition period. Latvia, along with Lithuania and Estonia, ceased to be part of the USSR only 4 months before the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. The Soviet radioelectronics school closed soon after restoration of Latvia's independence. The buildings were stripped of equipment and left abandoned. Number 3. World War II Air Raid Shelter, England. The most interesting part of the air raid shelter can be seen on the walls of one of the chambers. The walls are lined with portraits, around 20 of them. These mostly appear to be drawn in charcoal, or perhaps with soot from a lantern flame. Additionally, 2 are drawn in some kind of bright blue paint. There are men, soldiers in uniform and helmets, as well as well-dressed gentlemen. One even sports a pipe and dicky bow tie. Most of the sketches are women, each with 1940s hairstyles and fashion. Several of these portraits are accompanied by initials, either the artist's signature or perhaps the initials of the person in the portrait. On the roof there is writing, likely from cigarette light or lantern soot, mostly jumbles of letters but also some years, all early 1940s. It seems that these were drawn by workers whiling away time inside the air raid shelter, awaiting the all-clear signal to emerge back to the surface. This adjacent factory was built in the 1930s. Originally this was the headquarters of a large business empire. During World War II the building was requisitioned by the government. The building became a multi-purpose asset to the war effort. Part aircraft assembly line, part printers and textile manufacturer. However, this put the building at risk of being a target from German bombers. Unfortunately, building did not have any form of air raid shelter, so one was designed and added. The air raid shelter was built alongside the factory, which was preferred in situations where space allowed. This ensured that the shelter escape would not be blocked due to building collapse, in the event of a direct hit. The approximately 250 m long shelter runs parallel to the building, with entrances spaced approximately every 20 m along the length. This enabled rapid entry into the shelter, via the multiple entrances. There would have been benches along each side of the shelter, the shadows and some fixings remain. There were also the buckled corroded remains of tin chemical toilets, kettles and oil lamps. The air raid shelter was originally dug as a trench. The walls and roof were then lined with precast reinforced concrete slabs, which fitted together giving added strength. Earth was then mounted up to recover the shelter, adding another layer of protection from bomb debris. Number 4. Soviet Sports Hall, Germany. The GSSD school is a former Soviet school and barracks in East Germany. Originally, this area was owned by the Wehrmacht, the German Unified Military Forces, in years 1935 to 1945. There was a panzer division stationed here. After the Nazi defeat, the area served as a refugee camp in the immediate aftermath of World War II. Soon after, the area was occupied by the Soviets who repurposed and expanded the Wehrmacht base. They occupied the nearby airfield and constructed a large military town next to it. The area with the GSSD school buildings are in an area 5 kilometers away from the airfield. The cluster of buildings which is designated as Kasernen, or barracks on maps. This complex has a large sports hall in a separate building, as well as a smaller gymnasium on the upper floor of the main building. There are classrooms featuring posters of mathematical formulae, including quadratic equations. Next to this is a board that appears to be illustrating a nuclear bomb plume, and its dissipation after detonation. There is also a board featuring photos of recent graduates of the military courses. Nearby is an interesting board featuring small portrait paintings of heroic Soviet soldiers, along with names and presumably details on their military jobs. By wandering the school we discover another small gymnasium sports hall, as well as a classroom area. The building is now abandoned and its future is uncertain. Number 5. Soviet Nuclear Warhead Storage Depot, Hungary. This Soviet nuclear warhead storage depot is in Hungary. The history of this base contains a lot of uncertainty. Originally it was an ammunition storage depot for the Hungarian army. In the late 1950s the site came under Soviet army control. Initially, the Soviets continued to use the site as an ammunition stockpiling area. Subsequently, this was repurposed into a nuclear storage depot in the 1980s. The base became abandoned when the Soviets withdrew in the 1990s. The ammunition depot underwent repurposing during the late 1970s and 1980s. At this time, preparations for nuclear warhead storage occurred. These devastating weapons require secure storage in fortified underground areas. To this end, 5-meter-long concrete storage tunnels were built. There are 3 in total. Estimates suggest each area would be able to hold 21 warheads. 2 10-ton steel blast doors protected each repository. Unfortunately, these have since been pilfered. Declassified American and NATO maps call this site a nuclear warhead storage site. Despite this, it is not certain that nuclear warheads were stored here. That fact appears lost to the decades. These bases became abandoned when the Soviets retreated in the 1990s. Any nuclear warheads were also removed. Interestingly, these storage areas were then used to grow mushrooms. Nearly 80 tons of tasty fungi grew in these air-conditioned tunnels. Certainly not as dramatic as secret Soviet nuclear missiles. From mushroom clouds to mushroom farm. In the 1950s, the Soviet Union's nuclear program gained momentum. Construction of secret nuclear warhead storage facilities began across what now is Russian. It became clear that this alone was not sufficient. A better strategy was to stockpile nuclear armaments closer to potential targets. The Red Army began to look to neighboring Soviet-controlled countries. They built nuclear weapons storage facilities in Hungary, Czechia, and Poland. In this area of Hungary are several of these facilities. The location of these bases, of course, was top secret. The exact purpose of these bases was kept a secret from the surrounding Hungarians. The facilities are all in forests, on sites of existing ammunition depots. Soldiers coming and going would not be anything out of the ordinary. These depots were repurposed sometime in the 1970s and 1980s. New underground storage areas were added for nuclear warhead storage. Number 6. Tank Graveyard, Germany. Lost Tanks is a tank graveyard located in western Germany sitting within a 220-hectare site was once an armed forces training area and firing range. These now abandoned tanks were once used as hard targets for artillery practice. Some of the sites still used for military exercises and training. The forest is no longer used as a firing range, only as an armored vehicle driver training area. Nowadays, most of this huge site is a thriving nature reserve. Firstly, much of the area was placed under ecological protection in 1975. Since the mid-2000s, the designated nature reserve area occupies around 75% of the former military site. As a result, this large area now provides a home to many rare European flora and fauna species. Moist pastures surround one of the lost tanks. Small ponds have formed in the scars and furrows left by tank tracks. These provide havens for rare aquatic life. Another abandoned tank is surrounded by a forest of spruce and pine, the floor littered with their deciduous needles. Nearby there is another tank, standing in front of a beech and oak woodland. Number 7. World War II Codebreakers, England. World War II Codebreakers is a former British intelligence facility in England. The British Intelligence Service housed a strategically pivotal base here. During the course of the Second World War, highly skilled codebreakers worked day and night. Their goal was to decrypt German military transmissions, the infamous Enigma code. The world-renowned coders and cipher experts developed the world's first automatic decrypting computers. In fact, historians suggest that the work undertaken here played an important part in turning the tide of the conflict. Estimates suggest that intelligence gathered shortened the war between 2 and 4 years. This undoubtedly saved many thousands of lives. Nowadays, much of Codebreakers operates as a museum. Sadly, this historic block still lies derelict and decaying. All Codebreakers staff signed the Official Secrets Act. This forbid discussion of work details outside of their assigned team. Originally, teams worked in insulation in separate huts. Each hut was only privy to a small part of the transmissions. In this way, only those at the top of British intelligence being knowledgeable about the true content of the intercepted transmissions. National security demanded absolute secrecy. Built in 1943, this was one of the critical buildings on site. The plan of these buildings is a spider block, 13 office spurs sprouting from a central spine corridor. The concrete and brick corridors are Warren-like. 530 staff worked in this block initially. Ultimately, around 700 would be working here by the end of the war. The purpose-built building accommodated several specialist teams of codebreakers. Those teams were traffic analysis, transmission decryption, and final translation. Housing these teams all together enabled more efficient working and allowed more code to be analyzed. Their main function was the cracking the German Enigma code. Firstly, intercepted transmissions are decrypted. Purpose-built programmable computers eventually enabled this step to be automated. Fluent German-speaking translators would then go to work on the decoded message. Their job was to make sense of the message. This involved filling in gaps in the messages and translating them into English. Finally, the messages were delivered to British intelligence officers. Those at the top then decided the best way to utilize this information. The team continued to operate for several months after World War II, before disbanding. The exact nature of the work here was not declassified until the 1970s. The site served various facets of the government in the latter 1940s until the early 1990s. Codebreakers is owned by a trust, and is a now thriving museum. Number 8. Little Noisy Army Barracks, Hungary. Little Noisy is an abandoned army barracks in eastern Hungary. The exterior is very striking. The architecture is reminiscent of a castle. The building features turrets and towers. The walls are dark gray, mimicking the gray moody skies on the day of our visit. The images conjure up a rural setting, far from civilization. However, appearances can be misleading. Little Noisy is, in fact, situated in the middle of a small town. A huge apartment block stands next to it, and a motorway runs nearby. The monarch of the Austro-Hungarian Empire commissioned this military settlement at the end of the 19th century. These palatial buildings house artillery units. The site quickly grew and became the largest artillery range in Hungary. Along with the base, a small village grew up around the barracks. This village thrived on trade with the artillery barracks, and the barracks enjoyed goods and produce from the village. During the First World War, the base underwent expansion. The base even had its own currency by this point. A self-contained prisoner of war camp was established here. Romanian, Russian, and Italian prisoners would be kept here during wartime. At the end of the First World War, the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed. Subsequently, Little Noisy Army Barracks fell into dereliction. The site remained unoccupied for a quarter of a century. Nazi troops occupied the base during World War II. After the war ended, the Soviet army quickly occupied this prized location. The village adapted to the new tenants of Little Noisy. The soldiers traded gasoline for Hungarian wine, which they consumed in large quantities. There was also some sale of weapons at this time. The Soviets remained at the base until the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. It is said they stripped everything of value before departing. Number 9. Nazi Military Barracks, Germany. The Wehrmacht commissioned the construction of these Nazi military barracks in the 1930s. The Wehrmacht represented the unified armed forces of Nazi Germany. During the rearmament period of the German military, many sites such as these appeared in eastern Germany. This once luxurious barracks complex consisted of over 50 buildings. The complex would have been home to between 300 and 500 personnel, it has been estimated. Most of the Nazi military barracks would have been apartment blocks. In addition to this, there were numerous storage buildings. Officers and troops would have had access to on-site entertainment and leisure facilities. This barracks had an officers' club, tennis court, theater, and gymnasium. One day after the Nazi forces left the site in 1945, the Soviet army moved in. The dissolution of the Soviet Union occurred in the early 1990s, and the Soviet forces quickly vacated this site. This army barracks has been derelict ever since. Presently, a large part of the site has already been converted into housing. Much of the site still lays abandoned, succumbing to increasing graffiti and defacement with every passing year. Number 10. Supersonic Wind Tunnel, England. This supersonic wind tunnel was part of an aircraft research facility. This site was founded in the 1940s and operated until the 1990s. Many of the buildings have been repurposed, but some buildings such as this one remain abandoned and neglected. The facility researched aerodynamics, the study of the effects of air flowing past a solid object, such as an aircraft or aircraft part. Despite serving military and civilian customers for over 40 years, the once state-of-the-art facility became surplus to requirement in the mid-1990s. The working area of the wind tunnel was demolished several years later, salvaging over 10,000 tons of steel from the machinery and ducting. There were 4 wind tunnels at this site, added progressively as the decades passed and technology advanced. These high-quality research facilities allowed testing of aircraft components under a variety of wind speeds, starting from around 80 miles per hour and ranging up to supersonic speeds. This building is the remains of the penultimate edition. This area represents the remains of the 8x8 supersonic wind tunnel. 8x8 refers to the width and height of the tunnel, which was 8 feet by 8 feet. It was added in the 1950s and was able to produce supersonic wind speeds of up to Mach 2.5 times the speed of sound, over 1,900 miles per hour. The wind tunnel fans and systems were controlled from the adjacent electrical control room, overlooking the large hall through several small windows. Banks of switches and dials offered complete control of this complex system. Number 11. Royal Air Force Stenigot Radar Dishes, England. The RAF Stenigot radar dishes, Lincolnshire, were built in the 1950s. This Royal Air Force radar station commenced operations in 1938. Decommissioning started in the early 1990s. At this time, new forms of communication technology rendered this station obsolete. Around 120 people would have been employed at this site when it was operational. After the Second World War, RAF Stenigot continued to operate and played a part in the Cold War. This time the site was part of the AC high radio communication system. The radar dishes were added at this time. They flanked a relay station which was added inside the base compound. 2 dishes faced north, to pass signals towards the next relay station in Northumberland. The southern dishes sent information to Kent, the nearest southern relay in the network. The 60-foot diameter dishes would have been supported by steel frames. When the site was decommissioned, most of the base was demolished. The supporting frames were removed during the late 1990s. Number 12. Warplanes, France. Warplanes are a small collection of ex-military aircraft, laying in a seldom-used corner of a French airfield. This location is also known as Urbex Airlines. These American-built turboprop aircraft were in service between 1945 and 1984, and were designed as a maritime patrol and anti-submarine aircraft. They were used extensively during the Cold War, where they were paired with destroyer warships and hunter-killer teams to track and annihilate Soviet submarines. The belly-mounted radar enabled detection of submarines as they surfaced, even across large distances. They were also fitted with magnetic anomaly detectors, which could also aid in submarine detection. Sonar buoys could be launched from the rear of the plane, to tag the last known location of a submarine so the destroyer warships could zero in on the target. At the end of World War II, some aircraft were retrofitted with jet-assisted takeoff rocket boosters to enable deployment from aircraft carriers. They were fitted with compact little boy nuclear bombs, to increase the U.S. Navy nuclear strike capability at this critical time. Number 13. Beelitz, Heilstatten, Germany. Beelitz Heilstatten is a large abandoned hospital complex, on the outskirts of Berlin. This large hospital complex originally had over 60 buildings, covering 200 hectares. Although some buildings there have been some redeveloped, large areas remain abandoned. In recent years, it has been announced that many key buildings may be renovated. The plans include the famous Whitney Houston House, as well as some of the surgical buildings. The site primarily served as a health resort and sanatorium for those suffering from lung disease, including tuberculosis. Patients were sent here to recover in the fresh air of this hospital deep in the pine forest. In the days before antibiotics, this was the only treatment for this often fatal disease. Divided into 4 quadrants, the hospital segregated patients based on treatment needs. The southern area of the complex treated non-infectious diseases. Treatment of tuberculosis and other infectious pulmonary disease occurred in the northern quadrants. During the First World War, the site served as a field hospital. Notably, this hospital treated Adolf Hitler's leg injury sustained during the Battle of the Somme. Many troops injured during World War II came here for treatment. Subsequently, the Russians occupied the war-damaged hospital in 1945. They occupied the site until 1994. Following the withdrawal of the Soviet Army, there was a period of renovation. A neurological rehabilitation now operates in some of the renovated buildings. Many large and interesting derelict buildings remain abandoned in many parts of the complex. They are decaying and crumbling as the decades pass. As a result of this, the strangely beautiful Beelitz Heilstatten has featured in several films. These include The Pianist, Valkyrie, and A Cure for Wellness. The central bathhouse was constructed between 1899 and 1902. This forms part of the men's sanatorium. The main entrance features a small reception area, with a small flight of stairs up to the main corridor intersection. Upstairs there are 2 large exercise halls, at opposite ends of the building. Similarly, both feature carved wooden dragons adorning the wooden ceiling struts. The living pavilion was built between 1899 and 1902. The living pavilion is in the area for treatment of non-infectious diseases. This pavilion had 225 beds split over 3 floors. There is a large dining room, painted a fetching green. An ornate 4-leaf clover-shaped window floods the stage with natural light. The Beelitz Heilstatten Tuberculosis Clinic was built between 1898 to 1902. The clinic had room for 186 patients. The building is also known as Whitney Houston House, a nickname derived from a banner that was once hung above the stage by some resident art students. There were plans to renovate this hall, but it seems that these have not come to fruition yet. Number 14. Soviet Theater, Bulgaria. The abandoned Soviet theater lays hidden in a Bulgarian mountain village. The theater was once part of a larger community center, which itself dates back to the 1860s. The prominent yellow building is tucked away in a rural town, deep in the Balkan Mountains. The windows are crudely boarded with planks, the original windows long since gone. The theater itself has been abandoned since the 1990s. Since then it has been silent and empty. The romantic backstory is that this abandoned theater was used as a cinema by the Soviet government to show films of the state, until the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1991. The Bulgarian Communist Party, although allied with the USSR, was never part of the Soviet Empire. However, Bulgaria was indeed part of the Eastern Bloc up until 1989, when the Bulgarian Communist Party began to drift away from relations with the USSR. Number 15. Forgotten MIGs, Hungary. Forgotten MIGs are a collection of abandoned MiG-21 and Su-22 aircraft in Hungary. They stand neatly lined up in a farmer's field, at the side of a disused runway. The Hungarian Air Force own these aircraft. They bear traditional tail insignia, aligned triangles which point towards the front of the aircraft. The insignia colors match the Hungarian flag. NATO standard gray-on-gray replaced this insignia on modern in-service aircraft. Number 16. USSR Flight School, Germany. USSR Flight School is an abandoned military airfield and training camp in Germany. Originally this site is documented to have been an airship port, established in the early 20th century. Solidar Barracks and hydrogen production plant were located along the small runway, to maintain the fleet. After the First World War, the site was re-established as a glider training camp. The Luftwaffe occupied the site in the 1930s and developed a fully fledged military airbase to hone pilots' aerial skills in preparation for war. The site was large, the size of a small town by the time the Second World War began. Towards the end of the Second World War, the Soviet Red Army took over the site and stationed several units of the Soviet Air Force here. The runway was extended, and anti-aircraft missile batteries were set up to protect the base and assets. Aircraft squadrons of MiG-21 and later MiG-23 fighter jets were stationed here while this base was under Soviet control. The Russians abandoned the base in the mid-1990s during the unification of Germany, and the site has been falling into a state of decay ever since. Number 17. Das Olympisches, Germany. Das Olympisches is an abandoned Olympic village in Germany. It covers over half a square kilometer near to existing Nazi Unified Armed Forces military camps. The grounds were landscaped to produce an upper and lower part of the village, and there was a large man-made lake which featured a sauna and terrace cafe overlooking the water feature. Animals and waterfowl were borrowed from a local zoo and relocated to the lake and surrounding garden areas. The site originally had over 150 buildings, including all the usual Olympic sports facilities: swimming pool, sports hall, gymnasiums, 25m outdoor running track and many sports fields. Around 4,000 athletes would have resided in the Olympic Village during the Games. The village was built with military design and use in mind, and it was planned to return the buildings to the Wehrmacht after the Games had come to a close. After the Games, it became an infantry school and training ground. The reception buildings were converted into a large military hospital, and other buildings were repurposed into a school and lecture halls. Soviets took over after the Second World War, where it was then used to house military personnel. The Red Army used the facilities of Das Olympisches for training troops during military service in Germany. The Soviets demolished many of the original buildings, replacing them with soulless but functional brutalist concrete apartment blocks. The original German sculptures and reliefs were removed, and murals painted over or partly replaced by their own communist propaganda. The last Russian soldiers left in the early 1990s when the Berlin Wall fell. Germany became unified and the Soviet Union began to disintegrate. Number 18. Haus der Offiziere, Germany. Haus der Offiziere is an abandoned former military base in Germany. The first buildings on this site date back to the early German Empire in the 1800s. It slowly became one of the largest military bases in Europe by the start of World War I, where it was used as a prisoners of war camp. After World War I, an Army Sports Academy was established, where athletes trained for the Olympics. The base was expanded in the 1930s. Nazis came to power and formed the headquarters of German Unified Nazi Military Forces on this site. The military base was expanded during the Nazi World War II campaign, with many operations being conducted from underground communications bunkers beneath the base. Soviets occupied after the war, and the base became a key military outpost once again during the Cold War. The base was converted into a Soviet-controlled closed town, and by 1970s 75,000 Soviets lived here, including a lot of families and non-military personnel. A fully functioning city had been developed, with daily trains to and from Moscow bringing in goods and supplies, allowing the town to operate autonomously from the surrounding areas. While interaction with the surrounding area was kept to a minimum, East Germans often bribed guards for entry to take advantage of the cheaper Soviet goods like cigarettes and alcohol. Most inhabitants left soon after the Berlin Wall fell and Germany became unified, and the Soviet Union began to dissolve. The town was abandoned in mid-1990s when the last dregs of the Soviet Red Army returned home. Nowadays, a lot of the buildings around Haus der Offiziere have been converted back into housing or demolished. Number 19. Prison 11, Belgium. Prison 11 forms a small part of a sizable army barracks in a historically important Belgium town. These barracks date back to the end of the 19th century. However, plans for the military base on this site date to some 40 years earlier. Initially, only a small battalion were stationed here, but over the decades this was home to a variety of troops. In the 1930s, 3 infantry battalions resided here. In World War II, the Germans took over the barracks to house their own troops, but were later ousted at the end of the war by the Allied forces. After the war, American forces settled in these barracks briefly, before being returned to the Belgians. The buildings were finally abandoned in the mid-1990s. Block C of Prison 11 was converted to apartments in 2008, with plans to repurpose more of the site. Number 20. Royal Hospital H, England. Royal Hospital H was founded in the 1750s and covers around 25 hectares. Initially set up as a naval hospital, it later served the Army and Royal Air Force also. The hospital played a key role in several important medical advances, such as curing scurvy and setting up the first blood bank in the country. There was also a padded room and asylum for sailors with psychiatric disorders. The hospital closed in the late 2000s. It is now being redeveloped into housing, a hotel and retirement complex. This hospital is massive, consisting of a large main quadrangle which is connected to the 2 side wings via long corridors called crosslinks. Navigating this monstrous collection of buildings is hampered by blocked corridors and locked doors. Make sure to check out our video on 10 abandoned military bases in United States. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time for more Ghost Town Chronicles.